Argentina's president, Cristina Fernandez, announced today that the country is to renationalise YPF, its biggest oil company, ousting Repsol as majority shareholder. The move prompted a sharp fall in the Spanish oil group's shares and condemnation from Spain. Well, joining me now to talk about it are Guy Chazan, energy correspondent, and Richard Lapper, head of Brazil Confidential and a former Latin America editor. Richard, if I could start with you, are foreign oil companies going to look at the way Repsol have been treated and perhaps think twice about entering Argentina?
I think any foreign investor is going to think twice about entering Argentina when this sort of thing happens. Obviously, it sent a very, very bad message. I think it was pretty unexpected by Repsol. There's been lots of talk about the Argentine government acquiring a stake in YPF, a company it privatised back in the 1990s. But I think the scale of they're taking the whole of, virtually the whole of the Repsol stake is pretty surprising.
And given the rhetoric that we've seen in recent times from both Bolivia and Venezuela, do you think we're going to see a rise in economic nationalism in the region?
Well, I think one has to be pretty careful about that kind of statement. I don't think this is symptomatic of what is going on in Latin America as a whole. In fact, I think this is an outlier in terms of both the radicalism, the scale of this nationalisation. Argentina, back in the 1990s, was a very radical privatiser, and I think it is now being quite a radical nationaliser. There's a history of populism in Argentina. Cristina Fernandez was very definitely playing to the gallery. There's a bit of scapegoating of the private sector for problems that to some extent are homegrown, the failure of Repsol to invest and so on. And the fact that the Argentine government has had to import so much oil in the last couple of years, which has affected its current account and so on. So there's a certain amount of domestic element to all this. If you look at Latin America as a whole, the scenario is much more positive. You've got very positive stories in Brazil, very positive stories in Colombia. Argentina and to some extent Venezuela, very, very different.
Okay, now Guy, if I could just bring you in now. Argentina, of course, has made a series of oil and gas discoveries in recent times. Does the country really have the money and the expertise to handle these discoveries alone?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, they've just made extraordinary discoveries of shale oil and shale gas. Some estimates suggest that Argentina actually has some of the largest deposits of unconventional oil and gas after the US and China. The fact is it's going to need outside help to develop those resources because they are incredibly difficult to extract. And there hasn't been a great record of national oil companies having success in realising their full unconventional oil and gas potential.
And where might it look to now? Which oil companies might lend their expertise in the light of what's happened?
Well, Repsol isn't the only foreign oil company actually active in the shale sector in Argentina. ExxonMobil and Total are there as well. But it is a pretty moot question, I think, as to whether the international oil companies will want to expose themselves more, increase their exposure to Argentina after what's happened to Repsol. So I think it's probably going to be very difficult for them to attract the foreign investment that they really need to develop that sector now.
And just a final thought with you, Guy, briefly. Do you think that we're going to see a rise in resource nationalism on the back of this?
Well, as Richard said, it's kind of a bit of an outlier, really. I mean, the trend in recent years has actually been away from resource nationalism. You've seen, for example, in Russia, which is very, very nationalistic. In the past, it expropriated Shell's stake in the Sakhalin consortium out in the Far East a few years ago. But in recent years, they've actually gone in the other direction. And, for example, ExxonMobil is just about to enter into a big joint venture with Rosneft in the Arctic because they realise that they can't develop these resources without foreign help.
Okay, well, Guy and Richard, thank you both very much indeed for that. Now you can get plenty more analysis of this story at ft.com/energy.